Welcome to Bed Crime Stories podcast. I'm your host, T. I hope you're having a great day. FSU law professor and father of two Dan Markel lost his life as he sat in his Honda car in his garage with the engine idling. Before he could even turn the car off, hired hitman Sigfredo Garcia put a weapon up to the driver's side window and shot Dan twice in the head. Dan died 14 hours later. Currently, his former mother-in-law, the matriarch of the Adelson family, is on trial for her alleged role in the crime. She is accused of conspiring with her son, Charlie, and many say she was the mastermind of the plot. Donna isn't the only mother in the courtroom today. Dan Markel's mother, Ruth, is also there watching, as the woman she used to call family stands accused of taking her precious and only son's life away. Dan's mother, Ruth, used to have a ritual with him. Dan would call her in Toronto from his car during his ride home from work. The two would talk right up until he pulled into his garage. Thank God at the time he was shot, Dan was talking to one of the teachers at a non-denominational school that his ex-wife Wendi had enrolled their eldest son Benjamin in without consulting Dan first. Dan talking to the teacher meant that his mother, Ruth, did not have to hear those shots ring out. Now, Ruth Markel wrote a book about Dan and the crime called The Unveiling. In it, Ruth outlines all the acts that Donna Adelson suggested to her daughter Wendi to try and harass Dan into letting Wendi relocate to South Florida with her and Dan's sons, Lincoln and Benjamin. And what was shared in Donna's trial is pretty much just the tip of the iceberg. In today's video, I'm going to share all the strange and downright cruel behavior Donna inflicted on Dan Markel and also on his family after the crime. I'm also going to weave in some of the vicious acts that Donna's daughter, Wendi, did to Dan and to his family. At the synagogue 2 days after Dan's death, when a memorial was held for him in Tallahassee, Donna Adelson went up to Ruth, Ruth's ex-husband Phil, and Ruth and Phil's daughter Shelley. Donna was sobbing uncontrollably, and she said, quote, "We'll make sure the boys have roots, I promise," end quote. Those words are very telling. They betrayed Donna and Harvey and Wendi's plans to basically take control over Danny's sons. Little did Ruth know back then that the Adelsons would sweep Wendi and the boys out of Tallahassee within days of Dan's death. Now, at Wendi's rented house in Tallahassee after the memorial service, Wendi, Harvey, and Donna appeared to be avoiding the Markels. Harvey simply said hello to them, and he kept on walking. Wendi seemed to surround herself with her friends, so much so that it was basically creating a barrier between her and the Markels. Before leaving Wendi's home that day, Ruth Markel told her that she, Phil, and Shelley would like to see Lincoln and Benjamin the next day. And Wendi agreed. But around noon the next day, when Ruth called Wendi to see about meeting up with the little boys, Wendi told her that it was not a good time and that the boys, quote, "are really busy," end quote. Those boys were the Markels' only connection to Dan, and for Wendi to deny the paternal grandparents access to them on the day after Dan's memorial, a day when the Markels had to go to the funeral home to make arrangements for their son's body to be sent to Toronto. Well, that's just plain cruel. Wendi reluctantly agreed to let the Markels see the boys the next day, but when Ruth called that morning, she was once again told that Lincoln and Benjamin were busy, too busy to see their grieving grandparents. Later that day, when Ruth and Phil wanted to take some of the boys' toys from Dan's house over to Wendi's, Ruth called Wendi and was informed that Lincoln and Benjamin and Wendi were now in Miami. You heard that right. Wendi skipped Tallahassee with Benjamin and Lincoln in tow. She told the Markels that she was worried about her own safety and the boys in Tallahassee. And in fact, it turned out that Wendi, Donna, and Harvey didn't tell anybody they were leaving Tallahassee in order to drive to Miami, including the police who wanted to speak with the Adelsons before they left town. So the cops were denied their interviews with the Adelsons, and the Markels were only allowed to spend maybe a few hours with Lincoln and Benjamin during what was a nightmarish period for them post Dan's unaliving. Dan did not die of natural causes. Being unalived was a horror that Ruth and Phil and Shelley were just coming to know. Over the next 2 years after the crime, the Markels had some contact with Benjamin and Lincoln. However, after April of 2016, they were completely cut off from their grandsons. Let's go back now to when Dan Markel and Wendi got married. Dan wanted his sons to eat a kosher diet, which means no pork, no bacon, no shrimp, nor any other types of meat and seafood. Well, there might be a few. I don't know all the kosher laws, but you don't want to mix certain foods with other foods. Things like a pepperoni pizza would be a no-go. Well, Donna and Harvey Adelson, per Ruth, went out of their way to sabotage Lincoln and Benjamin's kosher diets. They introduced the boys to McDonald's cheeseburgers. Mixing meat and milk products like cheese was a no-go for a kosher diet. So this was a blatant disregard for the boys' father's wishes. Basically, Donna and Harvey were the type of in-laws who just did whatever they wanted, and they said to hell with Danny's religious beliefs. Such an utter lack of respect for Dan Markel and his heritage. And Ruth said in her book that as soon as Lincoln and Benjamin were born, Donna Adelson began campaigning for Wendi and Dan to leave Tallahassee. So Donna's desire to have Wendi and the two sons, and maybe Dan too, to relocate to Miami pretty much began once the children were born. And note that one time when Dan Markel had to travel to Israel for a month, Donna actually fed his sons shrimp and pork. That might not sound like a big deal to you or to me, but to Dan Markel, it was a huge deal. Once you get the boys loving these foods, things like bacon, pizza with pepperoni, how can you undo that? Donna Adelson was also instrumental in Wendi's divorce from Dan. We know that Dan was in New York preparing to give a lecture, and that's when Wendi decided to call him to say she was leaving him. And unbeknownst to Dan, Wendi had already left their shared home on Trescott Drive. She'd taken the two children, along with all of their belongings, at least the items that they still liked in terms of toys and the clothing that fit them and their bedding and their beds. And Wendi decamped to a new rental home that Donna had arranged for her. Harvey and Donna helped move all that stuff. They were right there with Wendi plotting to do this against Dan. Yeah, so don't let Donna's little old lady look fool ya, and don't let Harvey's sort of sad face with its downward mouth fool you either. These are cold, calculating people. Imagine how Dan felt when he rushed home, found his house mostly empty, saw that his kids were gone and had no idea where they were, and would not find out for more than 2 weeks. He also went and checked their bank account and saw that Wendi had helped herself to half. He also noticed that Wendi had emptied their safety deposit box 2 weeks earlier. She was doing all this stuff behind his back while they were still living in the same house. And all along the way, Donna and Harvey were right there helping her. As Wendi and Dan navigated their divorce, Dan learned that Donna had been bad-mouthing him to his boys, and that she'd served Lincoln and Benjamin bacon and shrimp. And Donna had also taken it upon herself to tell the boys' daycare to give them regular hot dogs and not the tofu variety that Dan had asked them to serve to his sons in order for them to be kosher. This greatly offended Dan, and it really sabotaged his plans for the boys. Clearly, Donna did not respect anything about Dan's religious preferences. And she didn't respect him as a parent. It's the parent who gets to decide what the kids eat, not the grandmother. And according to Ruth, Donna became obsessed with her hatred of Dan after Wendi's relocation request was denied by a judge, without prejudice, meaning that Wendi could never appeal it. It was a done deal. We know that Donna instructed Wendi to tell Dan that Lincoln and Benjamin would be baptized in the Catholic Church if he insisted on them staying in Tallahassee. We also know that Donna suggested dressing Lincoln and Benjamin in Hitler Youth costumes, which is surprising given that Donna and Harvey and their kids are all Jewish. This suggestion was off the charts cray-cray and incredibly offensive. When the divorce was granted in July of 2013, 1 year before Dan Markel was unalived, Wendi received a lump sum of $120,000, in addition to money she'd taken without asking Dan, and Dan had to pay $841 a month for child support, which, by the way, does not sound like a lot of child support for him to be paying. And Donna didn't call Dan Markel stupid in front of his sons just one time. Donna did this on 3 specific occasions in November of 2013. And when Dan asked his sons why Grandma would have said that, the boys replied, quote, "Because she says you are trying to take her sunshines away from her," end quote. Supporting the veracity of that statement is that one of Donna's jailhouse buddies testified that Donna called her, quote, "sunshine." I'll tell you what, Donna ain't calling Wendi her sunshine anymore, or Charlie either. Donna, to save her own neck during this trial, has thrown both of her children under the bus. Rob Adelson, of course, is out of the mix. He's been estranged for a long time, and he testified against Donna and drove home what a manipulative woman, an over-controlling mother she is. Dan and Wendi's youngest child, Lincoln, further stated that Grandma says she hates you. A grandmother who sows toxicity like that? Donna Adelson should be charged with another crime as well, and that is trying to alienate Dan's sons from him. Shame on her. Those poor children have had to have been affected by Donna's damaging behavior and her manipulations. Just days after Dan's unaliving, Wendi asked about his life insurance policy. In fact, she kept calling the insurance company to find out who the beneficiaries of the policy were. That reminds me so much of Lori Vallow Daybell, the Doomsday Mother. Same thing, obsessed with the money in the life insurance policy of the man that she helped to get unalived, allegedly. Well, Lori Daybell, we know, did it. Wendi, I'm going to say allegedly because she hasn't been charged yet. I guess Wendi wasn't grieving very much at that time. Per Ruth, when one of Dan's friends, Tamara Demko, started a GoFundMe, Wendi tried to get herself assigned as the main beneficiary of it, claiming that she was Dan's widow. Wendi also requested upkeep funds for her rent and food from her son's trust funds. Keep in mind that Wendi was already receiving $4,800 a month from government Social Security because of Dan's death. And Wendi was also entitled to take over ownership of Dan's house on Trescott Drive. Wendi walked away from Dan's death with her pockets overflowing with money and assets. In October of 2014, just 3 months after Dan's unaliving, Ruth flew from Toronto to Florida to visit Wendi and Lincoln and Benjamin. Ruth was accompanied by Shelley and Shelley's family. They stayed in Orlando in a hotel. When Wendi showed up, she had Lincoln and Benjamin with her, of course, but she also had her parents, Donna and Harvey Adelson. Imagine how happy Ruth and Shelley were to see Donna and Harvey. And Ruth realized that Wendi had managed to never be alone with her and with Phil. Again, Wendi was insulating herself from the Markels. Now, during a trip to a butterfly conservatory, Donna and Harvey made sure that Lincoln and Benjamin were never left alone with Ruth, not even for a minute. They kept hovering closely to prevent Ruth from being alone with Lincoln and Benjamin. It's almost like they were afraid of what Ruth might say to the boys. And note that neither Wendi nor her parents attended Dan's funeral in Toronto, and Wendi kept Dan's sons away from that occasion as well. In September of 2015, so a year or so after Dan's death, Wendi emailed Ruth and Phil to tell them that she had changed Lincoln and Benjamin's last name from Markel to Adelson. Can you imagine what a stab that was to the Markels' hearts and souls? Wendi blamed this on fears for her son's safety. Wendi also removed Benjamin's middle name, which was Amakai, which had been chosen specially to honor Ruth's mother. Dan would have been turning in his grave. 2 years after Dan's death, finally arrests were made. Hitman Sigfredo Garcia had been arrested, and Ruth called Wendi to give her a heads up. Apparently, law enforcement was telling the Markels, but not Wendi. When Ruth told her this news, Wendi became frantic, and she kept calling Ruth back several times, trying to get as many details as possible. Ruth told Tallahassee police officer Greg Isom about this, and he advised them not to communicate any longer with Wendi. Later, it was announced that Garcia's accomplice was Luis Rivera, his childhood friend. And it wasn't long before law enforcement made the connection between Sigfredo Garcia and his baby mama, Catherine McBanoa. And then law enforcement made the connection between McBanoa and Donna's son, Charlie Adelson. Charlie had been dating Katie McBanoa before and up to the time of the crime. And we know that Katie McBanoa was the conduit between Charlie Adelson and maybe Donna Adelson too, and the hitmen. So then there was a link between the Adelson family and the hitmen. During this period, the Markels became increasingly worried about Lincoln and Benjamin. Ruth wanted to know if they felt safe, what they were hearing about their father, Dan. And as you may know, if you've been following the case, it turned out that the Adelsons Dental Institute, and Donna Adelson in particular, had been writing checks to Katie McBanoa right after Dan's murder, and Donna signed all the checks. On October 1st of 2016, Catherine McBanoa was arrested and charged in connection with Dan's death. Wendi Adelson stopped communicating with Ruth Markel on October 13th of 2016, so just 12 days later. So imagine what Lincoln and Benjamin must have been hearing from the Adelsons during that time. I mean, Donna had no problem disparaging Dan in front of his kids before he died. After his death, one can only imagine what they were saying in front of those boys. Now, when Ruth Markel reached out to Jewish Adoption and Family Care Options, or JAFCO, in South Florida, out of fear that the Adelsons, or some of them, might soon be arrested, she wanted to make sure the boys would be kept safe during the period when the Markels would need to travel to the United States. Ruth was worried that Wendi might get charged and the boys might be taken into foster care or something. Unfortunately, Ruth's email to this JAFCO was accidentally released, allowing the media to pounce on it, and Wendi, upon hearing about this, ceased all communication with the Markels and cut off the Markels' access to Lincoln and Benjamin. Now, over the years, despite all of that, the Markels regularly sent gifts and cards for Lincoln and Benjamin, for their birthdays, for holidays, but they never heard back, and they could never be sure if Lincoln and Benjamin actually received the presents. As a result of all this stress, Ruth developed atrial fibrillation, especially when she learned that she could no longer see Benjamin and Lincoln. The trauma and stress were impossible for her to avoid. It was only when Wendi was to be a witness at Catherine McManawa's and Sigfredo Garcia's trial in 2019, only then did Wendi reach out to the Markels. Ruth believes that Wendi did this to make herself look good during that trial. Wendi finally sent a photo of Benjamin and Lincoln, and it was 3 years after Ruth had last seen the boys. And Wendi acted as though she wanted to make amends with the Markels, but she told them it was contingent on them telling Dan's friends to stop harassing her, Wendi, and making her life difficult. Wendi also emailed the Markels to say they were hurting her professionally and personally, and this in turn was hurting her boys. But Wendi's invitation to resume communications with the Markels was not an offer for real contact. He only offered recorded messages and videos of the boys. There was no chance for real-time in-person communication or real-time phone calls. Everything had to be recorded. And this, of course, meant that the Markels could never know for sure if Lincoln and Benjamin had seen their messages and videos. Now it was Wendi who was controlling things. Wendi would not allow for direct contact. There was no Skyping, no FaceTime. And this limited offer was taken away from the Markels immediately after Wendi appeared as a witness in Catherine McManawa's and Sigfredo Garcia's trial. It appeared that Wendi had only wanted to be able to tell that jury and the public at large that she was in contact with the Markels and that she had reconciled with them and that everything was good. In fact, after that trial in 2019, Wendi would only acknowledge the gifts that the Markels had sent. She did not comment on them, and she did not have her boys thank them. 2 years went by before Wendi responded to the Markels again. So obviously for many, many years, the Markels were kept from their grandsons by Wendi. And Ruth has been fighting for grandparents' rights to have access to their grandchildren. And in 2022, a bill named the Markel Act was passed. According to Ruth's book, the law creates, quote, a new access point for grandparents to petition courts for visitation with grandchildren in unique, tragic cases that relate to the natural parent. After the bill was passed, Wendi Adelson extended an invitation to the Markels. Ruth and Phil were finally able to visit with Lincoln and Benjamin in person in Miami. And by the way, as of September 2025, Wendi Adelson has not returned the Holocaust diamond that Dan proposed to her with. That ring is an important family heirloom. The Markels have asked for it back. Dan asked for it back. In fact, Wendi never wore that ring as her wedding ring. She got a different ring. Giving this important memento back to the Markels would be one way to lessen their pain, and yet Wendi Adelson has never had the decency to do that. In my mind, this tells us all we need to know about Wendi Adelson's real, true, core personality. But I do believe that Wendi and her brother Charlie, too, are in some way victims of Donna, and maybe Harvey too. We can see the way Donna was trying to manipulate the situation with Dan to get him to agree to let her grandsons and her daughter move to Miami away from him. It sounds like Donna was manipulating her children their entire lives. That doesn't excuse them from possibly conspiring to unalive Danny. Well, Charlie did conspire, so he is guilty of that. Wendi has not been charged. She is presumed innocent so far. Let's see what the jury comes back with when it comes to Donna Adelson and her guilt. Will they find her guilty for her role or alleged role in Dan Markel's death? Or will they say she's innocent because there isn't enough evidence? We shall soon find out. If you learned anything here, if you enjoyed it, then put your DNA on that like button. It's a free way you can say thanks. I love you guys, and I hope you have a great day. Until the next time on Bed Crime.